आज का दौर एक नई और मुनफरिद जंग हमारे सामने लेकर आया और वो है 5th generation warfare. आपने नाम तो जरूर सुना होगा.
This clip was recorded at a seminar in Karachi in September 2020. The seminar was one of several events marketed as apolitical conferences aimed at bolstering the rights of Pakistan's digital activists. In reality, PTI-aligned influencers took the stage to advocate for the development of a coordinated front in cyberspace to counter the threat of 5th generation or 5G warfare. Over the last couple of years, the term 5G warfare has gone viral in Pakistan, spurred on by repeated references to the term by political leaders, military officials, and media personalities. But what is 5G warfare anyway? Where did the concept and its catchy name come from? Soch explains 5G warfare. Despite its ubiquity in Pakistan, the origins of the term 5G warfare are shrouded in mystery. Most results of a simple Google search of the term 5G warfare are in the context of the race between countries like China and the US to develop 5G technology, the newest standard for wireless networks. These 5G networks have been the subject of numerous conspiracy theories, including the preposterous notion that 5G towers are responsible for the coronavirus pandemic. When 5G warfare is talked about in Pakistan, however, it's usually referring to something quite different. A kind of warfare that is focused on controlling public narratives through a combination of tools, particularly within cyberspace and mass media. But this understanding of the term is not very common globally. For instance, according to data analyzed by Soch, an overwhelming majority of tweets referencing 5G warfare in this manner come from within Pakistan, with approximately 86% of such posts written in Urdu. Even in India, tweets referring to 5G warfare, particularly from official sources, are few and far between. In fact, according to a 2021 Al Jazeera report, as far as international relations or international security scholars are concerned, 5th generation war is not a widely accepted idea. How then did 5G warfare become a widely accepted concept in Pakistani discourse? The term was mostly unknown in the country before 2018, when it burst on the scene thanks to a press conference in late December 2017, held by then Director General of the Inter-Services Public Relations, Major General Asif Ghafoor.
हर किस्म के 5th generation warfare के अवामिर से आगाह हैं और इस सिलसिले में जो मीडिया है आप मेरे सामने बैठे हैं आपका बहुत important रोल है.
After the December 2017 presser, General Ghafoor frequently used the term 5G warfare, which he framed as consisting of anti-Pakistan propaganda drummed up by enemies of the state and requiring a robust defense. This led many to believe that he may have coined the term himself. Back in 2020, Soch even made a video which erroneously described the term as his brainchild. And we weren't alone. When General Ghafoor stepped down from his post as DG ISPR in January 2020, mentions of 5G warfare hit an all-time high on Twitter, with thousands of users valorizing him as the man behind the idea. More recently, in February 2021, hashtag #MissYouBoss of 5th generation warfare was making the rounds, with hundreds of Pakistani Twitter users again thanking the former DG for his contributions to the 5G war. Upon further investigation, however, it appears the term can be traced back to Western political and military discourse from the late 2000s. One of the earliest references to 5G warfare was in a 2009 article by London-based management consultant Umair Haq, who described 5G warfare as an information war being waged digitally, and provided tips to then US President Barack Obama on how to defeat Republicans and conservative hardliners. Building on this theme, in a report published by 360 ISR, a global military and intelligence consultancy organization that was founded by former British Royal Air Force senior officer Ewan Stockbridge, 5G war is defined as a constant state of conflict where ambiguous actors seek to control narratives through a combination of physical and virtual actions. A particularly notable early reference to 5G warfare came in 2010 from the 5GW Educational Institute. This institute, now apparently defunct, was based out of Virginia in the US and primarily geared towards countering the influence of radical Islamic terrorism in the post-9/11 world through information operation that range from paper leaflets to the most sophisticated cyber campaigns. The Institute defined 5G warfare as an extension of asymmetrical and insurgent warfare, whereby the enemy uses all means, both conventional and unconventional military tactics and weapons. The definition provided by the 5GW Institute never really caught on anywhere, except in Pakistan, that is. Soon after General Ghafoor's presser, a military staff college in Brazil, Lieutenant Colonel Maz Nisar of the Pakistan Army cites the 5GW Institute's definition and outlines what he views as the 5G threats facing Pakistan. He briefly references diplomatic offenses to subvert Pakistan carried out by hostile countries. But Nisar's main focus in the article is on the multi-dimensional threat posed by extremist right-wing elements within the country, including the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, ISIS, and sectarian organizations, particularly those that pit Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims against one another. He goes so far as to describe these non-state actors as the prime threat to Pakistan's existence. A similar narrative is presented in a 2012 article cited by Nisar, in which lawyer and columnist Babar Sattar discusses the concept of fifth-generation war as it relates to terror networks such as the TTP, LET, and LEJ. But while Nisar's paper focused on the use of cyber technologies and the threat of right-wing extremism in Pakistan, the use of the term by acting officials and public figures, starting with Asif Ghafoor's December 2017 presser, frames 5G warfare as disinformation campaigns launched by Pakistan's external enemies, particularly India, and supported by internal allies. In a recent interview with Global Village Space, current DG ISPR Babar Iftikhar, General Ghafoor's successor, contended that misinformation campaigns against Pakistan are a major part of fifth-generation warfare, in particular referring to what he described as campaigns launched by India to discredit the China-Pakistan economic corridor and Pakistan's global image. Let's be clear, we know that sophisticated disinformation campaigns have been carried out against Pakistan. The disinformation campaign recently uncovered by Brussels-based organization EU Disinfo Lab is a prominent example. Though the report by EU Disinfo Lab did not explicitly tie the operation to the Indian state, commentators claim there is little doubt that a vast enterprise could exist without the government's knowledge. But disinformation and propaganda campaigns are nothing new. They constitute a common tactic that has been used in war and diplomacy for at least 2 millennia. Historians view the Behistun inscription covering the exploits of Darius the Great as an early instance of propaganda, all the way back in 515 BC. During the 2 world wars, films, television spots, radio plays, posters, and other familiar modern mediums were employed by multiple actors in the conflicts to mobilize hatred against the enemy and enlist the support and cooperation of civilian populations as well as neutral countries. Propaganda took a more sinister turn when Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda for Nazi Germany, used it not just to rally support against an external enemy, but to turn the country against its own Jewish citizens, as well as other minority groups. So is 5G warfare just a new name for an old and well-known phenomenon? Rebranded to sound futuristic and foreboding? Perhaps. But it's not that simple. Increasingly, the concept of 5G warfare is being used to discredit internal critics of the state and progressive voices by decrying them as part of a larger foreign-funded 5G war against Pakistan. Calls to participate in defending the state against this 5G war are overwhelmingly directed at young people who are told their efforts are required to defend Pakistan against grave threats. Intrepid 5G warriors are then cultivated via conferences like the ones that were held back in September. Now, social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook are flooded with users claiming to be part of Pakistan's new 5G war defense force. Groups and individual users claiming to defend Pakistan against 5G warfare do often circulate content aimed at promoting a positive image of the country. While some posts focus on the country's scenic beauty, others highlight the army's successes or criticize the actions of the Indian government. And many others are dedicated to praising the boss of 5G warfare, Major General Asif Ghafoor. But some of the most popular posts referencing 5G warfare, both in English and Urdu, are not directed at India or some external enemy, but rather baselessly target internal critics of the state and progressive political voices. In the era of 5G, any views or forms of advocacy that can be construed as challenging the status quo are in the line of fire. And ironically, campaigns targeting critical or progressive voices tend to mirror the alleged strategy of 5G warfare by spreading disinformation about their targets. Because the only way to combat 5G warfare is to use 5G warfare yourself. Take Aurat March, for instance. Since International Women's Day was first celebrated by Aurat March in 2018, Pakistan's feminist movement has been the subject of numerous false charges, including the accusation that the organization is foreign-funded. The campaign targeting Aurat March is just one of many campaigns coordinated by so-called 5G warriors to suppress critical voices under the guise of countering anti-Pakistan propaganda. What this really means is that armies of trolls and armchair warriors coordinated and perhaps compensated by both political parties and state institutions are locked in a never-ending battle of all against all. In the summer of 2019, one of the top trending hashtags on Pakistani Twitter was Arrest Anti-Pak Journalists. The hashtag, which trended for multiple days, was used to target journalists critical of the ruling PTI government. It was started by the account @IK_warriors and has since been suspended, and other accounts, real and automated, helped boost it. In June 2019, many of the same Twitter users circulated identical posts describing Justice Qazi Faez Isa of the Supreme Court as the pocket toy of the pigliotically born pigloticians, Nawazites and Zardariites. This came just months after Justice Isa had penned a strongly worded judgment in the 2017 Faizabad Dharna case, in which he noted lapse on the part of the government and other state institutions and directed Pakistan's intelligence agencies, including the ISI, the IB and MI, and the ISPR, not to exceed their constitutional mandates. Shortly after he penned the Faizabad judgment, Justice Isa was named in a presidential reference, accusing him of financial corruption in relation to properties owned by his wife and children in London. In June 2020, The Supreme Court declared the presidential reference null and void, following which #Pakistani judicial mafia gained popularity on Twitter, promoted by many of the same accounts responsible for the attacks on journalists and Aurat March. In a joint statement, opposition parties called on President Arif Alvi and Prime Minister Imran Khan to resign for filing an illegal and unconstitutional reference against a judge of the Supreme Court. More recently, Justice Issa suggested in open court that the government wanted him removed due to his criticism of state institutions in the Faizabad judgment, and stated that fifth-generation war was started against him and his family. The prevalence of coordinated campaigns targeting perceived critics of the state prompted a response from women journalists, over 150 of whom released a joint statement in August 2020, stressing that women with different viewpoints and those whose reports have been critical of the PTI government have been subjected to vicious attacks online. Sadly, many of the teenagers recruited to fight the 5G war online have been misled into engaging in harassment and bullying online, often using abusive and explicit language and threats of sexual violence against who they mistakenly regard as their enemies. While efforts by supporters of the ruling PTI government currently seem to form the bulk of coordinated online campaigns, other political parties and their supporters also manipulate cyberspace to impact public narratives. Recently, PMLN-aligned Twitter accounts, some of which were followed by PMLN leader Maryam Nawaz Sharif, circulated the hashtag #ARYHaramkhor.
Sorry, excuse my language.
In response to critical coverage by the media outlet of PMLN and the Pakistan Democratic Front, a now flailing political alliance against PTI. The trend gained enough traction that ARY News itself reported on it as a part of its regular coverage. Links between social media campaigns and any official political party or government machinery has never been formally acknowledged. However, reports suggest that party media cells are often involved. In 2019, for instance, Facebook took down a network of more than 100 pages, accounts, and groups with visible signs of loyalty to the military and the ruling PTI government for engaging in coordinated, inauthentic behavior. Facebook's investigation into the activity found that it was linked to the employees of the ISPR, much to the distress of General Ghafoor, who denied the charge and condemned Facebook for taking down the pages. So, has anything like 5G warfare ever happened before? Perhaps the closest historical parallel to what's happening in Pakistan with 5G warfare is something that took place in America almost 70 years ago. In the early 1950s, U.S. government officials, led by Senator Joe McCarthy of Wisconsin, a right-wing Republican, accused hundreds of patriotic Americans of being Soviet spies, Russian sympathizers, or members of the Communist Party. The era of McCarthyism, a term which is now more broadly applied to the practice of making accusations of subversion and treason, was one of intense paranoia and media frenzy. The alleged communist threat became a convenient way to blacklist and silence critics, whether they were journalists, prominent intellectuals, Hollywood artists, or government employees. Everyone is concerned about the threat of 5G warfare against Pakistan, just as paranoia surrounding the internal communist threat was rampant under McCarthy. The era of McCarthyism ended due to the opposition of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, as well as awareness on the part of the American public, who slowly began to realize that McCarthy's accusations were mostly false and fraudulent.
And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear, he merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
To sum up, The reality is that when former DG ISPR Asif Ghafoor started using the term 5G warfare, it wasn't because he was a strategic genius who had discovered a new kind of warfare that no one else in the world knew anything about. The concept of 5G warfare originated in the West, predominantly with a view towards countering radical Islamic terrorism. It was then misappropriated in Pakistan and has since become a useful conspiracy theory to justify the suppression of internal criticism and attack those who are perceived as insufficiently aligned with the version of the country's ideology espoused by the powers that be. The unfortunate irony of the situation is that Pakistan's 5G warriors are doing exactly what 5G warfare against the country is allegedly intended to: polarizing and destabilizing the country by pitting Pakistani against Pakistani and thereby discrediting Pakistan on the global stage. So, what's the solution? We're not suggesting that people stop taking a stance against the spread of harmful propaganda targeting Pakistan. Efforts to discredit the country, such as the campaign exposed by EU Disinfo Lab, should be publicly scrutinized and ruthlessly fact-checked. But we do need to stop viewing any and all criticism of the Pakistani state and its institutions through the lens of 5G warfare, falsely labeling those that we disagree with as foreign agents. People should have the right to express themselves freely, without fear of facing trumped-up charges and systematic online harassment. Rather than targeting our own, let's stand together in demanding that right for all Pakistanis.
So I thank you all for this sensible reporting और आपका रोल बहुत अहम है and we expect कि मीडिया जो है इस 5th generation warfare में पाकिस्तान की अवाम और अफवाज पाकिस्तान की मदद में अपना रोल अदा करते रहेगा.